Hello and welcome. My name is Natalie Arriola, and today we will be exploring the work of the inimitable Claude Cahun. Cahun was born Lucie Renée Mathilde Schwab in Nantes, France in 1894 to a Jewish father and French Catholic mother. When she was only 14 years old, she met her lifelong partner, Suzanne Malherbe, who would later take the name Marcel Moore. Guided by Cahun, the two took on the established heteronormative, male-dominated surrealist art circles of Paris and became influential contributors to the art conversations of their time. What makes Cahun such a captivating character is that she was wildly ahead of her time, perhaps even ahead of our time. Cahun was very interested in identity, and particularly the identities we assume based on the socially enforced standards of morality. Cahun famously said, "Under this mask, another mask. I will never be finished removing all these faces." From early in life, she found herself incapable of satisfying socially acceptable representations of femininity and womanhood. Her images are often about deconstructing gender roles and asking her viewers to question their ideas and values surrounding love and sex. For Cahun, gender is performance. It is a mask we wear. Our values, our beliefs, our ideas about who we are and the world we live in are constructed and thus capable of deconstruction and rearrangement. Cahun was not only a photographer, but a prolific writer whose essays were published in notable magazines of her time. In one such publication, Cahun and other surrealists were asked to respond to the question, "For whom do you write?" In keeping with her character, Cahun could not respond to this question in the straightforward manner of her comrades. Instead, she chose to reframe the question, changing it to read, "Against whom do you write?" then offering a thought-provoking reply. That is to say that I write, that I wish to write, above all, against myself. While Cahun was specifically referring to writing in this essay, this statement speaks to her general approach to art in all its forms and mediums. So what does it mean to create art against oneself? Let's find out in today's episode of Natalie Arriola is Murdering the Classics. I remember it. It was the carnival. I had spent my solitary hours disguising my soul. The masks had become so perfect that when the time came for them to walk across the plaza of my conscience, they didn't recognize each other. I adopted the most off-putting opinions one by one. Those that displeased me the most had the best chance of success. But the makeup that I employed seemed indelible. I scrubbed so hard to wash it off myself that I took off my skin, and my soul, like a flayed face, no longer had a human form. Claude Cahun, from a section of her essay Bedroom Carnival, entitled Captive Balloon. Cahun often focused on gender issues, but her understanding of identity dives much deeper to the core of who we are as individuals and our sense of self. We all wear masks. Perhaps some of them fit better than others. But what if none of the prescribed masks fit? Do we try to force ourselves into them anyway? And what price do we pay for this, both as individuals and as a society? Her image of the captive balloon is a particularly interesting one, which I would like to incorporate into my Cahun-inspired piece. There are many interpretations we could ascribe to the symbol of the captive balloon. It could be an imprisoned soul, desire, or imagination. It could also be seen as one of the masks we wear, or perhaps the fragile sense of identity we create for ourselves from the options given to us. a false sense of self that can easily be deflated. The specific interpretation does not matter so much as whether the image invokes a questioning in the viewer. One of the most exciting things about surrealism, and particularly Cahun's work, is that it shies away from didacticism. It does not tell the viewer what to think, but rather requires the viewer to engage with the imagery and draw their own conclusions. Cahun strongly believed that her role as an artist was not to preach, but to open her audience up to new ideas and possibilities in order to evoke a questioning of socially ordained values. She understood that you cannot change someone else's mind. Only they can change it themselves by finding the courage to look within. Today, I'm going to be working in a way more in keeping with my typical image-making techniques. I'll be building a surrealist composite photograph incorporating the image of the captive balloon. Cahun's photographic surrealism often took the form of photo montage, which is not dissimilar to today's composite photography as realized using Photoshop. I will be playing on her uncanny blending of symbols, forms, and objects in an attempt to build an image that is simultaneously an homage to Cahun and a representation of my own creativity. I will be photographing my subject first, then separately photographing a couple objects under the same lighting conditions. This will give me the building blocks I need to compose my final image in Photoshop. Before we get started with our shoot, I want to talk a little bit about my idea for this image. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be creating an image inspired by Cahun's idea of the captive balloon. And essentially what I want to do is just have my subject, which is going to be me in this case, just facing square on at the camera. And I'm going to remove the head and replace that with a balloon that is quite literally going to be inside of a cage. So that's the basic idea for the image. So let's just talk about our current setup and the lighting that we have. So my main light is going to be this light over here, which is my Photodiox dish light. So it's a nice soft light, but it's also a bit of a smaller lighting source, and I'm going to be pretty close to it so it won't spread the light around a lot. And then I also have a fill light over behind my camera, and I have that set to about 50% power because I just want to really kind of have a nice pop to this image, and I do want shadows, but I don't want them to be too dense for this one. So I'm just getting lined up with my markers that I made for myself here so that I can get my shot. And really, we're only gonna need like 1-2 shots of this. It's just basically, I just need to be facing straight towards the camera, and that's it. So I am going to have to remove my mic for this, so you won't be able to hear me for just a moment, but I just want to avoid having to edit that piece out in Photoshop so that I'm not making extra work for myself. Okay, so that is it for the subject. Super, super easy. So now I do need to photograph my objects. Let me just show you what those are so you can get an idea of what I'm doing here. So first I'll be using this glass, and essentially what I'm going to be doing is holding this in front of my eye and getting a close-up shot of that. And this is what I'm going to use for the balloon part of the image. It's just going to create a kind of distorted looking eye peering through this sort of circular end of the glass. So I think that will make for a really interesting balloon part of our image. And the lighting on that is not going to change. We want to make sure that we're photographing our objects under the exact same lighting conditions. The only thing that will change is that I will be taking the camera and moving the position, and because I really do want to get like a nice close shot on that. And then we will be photographing this object, which it's like a globe, but I think that this part here will serve quite nicely for our cage, for our balloon. So you'll note that this is a black object. So when I photograph this one, I'm actually going to put my white V-flats up behind it in order to give it a better contrast from its background, which will make it easier for me to select it out in Photoshop. And that is it. We will have all of the building blocks for our image. My shoot went according to plan, but I won't really know whether these elements are going to come together until I start combining my images in Photoshop. Before we move on, I'd like to talk a little more about Cahun's history. Cahun was living in France prior to World War II and was well aware of the dangers imposed by fascism to the freedoms she so adamantly campaigned for in her work. Not long before the Nazi occupation began in France, she and her partner Marcel Moore moved to the small island of Jersey. Eventually, the Nazi occupation made its way to the island, and the two women found themselves in an increasingly dangerous situation. Most of the residents of Jersey were not willing to risk defiance of Nazi forces on the island, but Cahun and Moore would not be silenced. They began making anti-Nazi propaganda in the form of letters written from the perspective of a German soldier they called the soldier without a name. By posing themselves as a Nazi soldier, questioning his allegiance to Hitler, Cahun and Moore were able to see beyond the black and white lines of enemy versus ally and good versus evil. They showed their understanding that we are all human and we are all capable of both kindness and cruelty. The appeal to the humanity of the German soldiers would, in their minds, be a much more effective strategy than writing them off as monsters. Cahun was asking the soldiers to question themselves, just as she once vowed to write against herself. I have to say that this image is my favorite that I've created thus far for my Murdering the Classics series. It came together beautifully, and I feel like it truly captures the symbol of the captive balloon in a way that is both aesthetically and intellectually intriguing. Claude Cahun was an exceptionally strong and remarkably intelligent person. Her image of the captive balloon says a lot about her understanding of the self. We often find ourselves feeling trapped within the limited roles society leaves open to us. In this sense, we have all experienced a feeling of captivity and the awareness that our fragile sense of self may easily be deflated at any moment. And this is at the heart of Cahun's belief in the importance of self-evaluation. Is there a true self? Maybe and maybe not. But this isn't really the point. The point is to always remain curious. Curious about who we are, why we believe what we believe, and perhaps most importantly, how our beliefs impact those around us. This is what Cahun means when she talks of making art against herself. The moment we become complacent and stuck in our ways is the moment we stop evolving. If we want a better and more accepting world for ourselves and for those around us, our work begins by looking within and honestly evaluating what we see. Thank you for joining me in this exploration. Please be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel so you won't miss out on future episodes of Natalie Arriola is Murdering the Classics.